was a time where the telcos were dominant and what we now think of as big tech wasn't big.
Yeah.
The problem is they were, just as Dennis characterised the big tech as greedy fucks, I think the telcos probably were. And this is the problem. They get hubristic. They're like, we're the big guys. We can call all the shots. We don't have to compromise. We don't have to revenue share. We don't have to partner with anyone.
Yeah.
And then suddenly they suddenly start bitching about OTTs about a decade or so ago. And then suddenly it's too late. Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast. We've been about 9 days since the last one because the Dennis O'Brien one, on which more in a minute, we recorded on a Wednesday. So in theory we got lots to talk about, although I was just looking over the news and there's been fuck all news in that time. So that's it, I'm afraid. Sorry, see you next week. No.
Also, it seems you're by yourself. I can't see anybody.
Oh, right. This is
I've got my
Pierre's laboured joke about.
I've got my Desert Storm t-shirt.
Ian's got like a camouflage t-shirt.
It is great.
And Pierre just can't get over how funny it is to say, I can't see him because he's so well camouflaged.
It really freaks me out when he did it and came in the office.
No, he came into the office and started talking to me and standing over Ian. He's going, "Where's Ian?" And I was going, "What do you mean, mate?" And he goes, "Where's Ian?" I went, "He's there." He went, "Bah." And it was all a joke.
It was done very well, though.
It was. He was very deadpan. I know, and we're sufficiently tired that I was just like, I don't understand what's happening.
Maybe I'm having visions. Yeah.
Oh dear. So there we go. And we'll get into why we're tired in a minute as well. What was I going to say? Yeah.
Very cold.
In fact, I'm gonna start by before we get into why we're tired, because that will just get us into the main body of the pod. I want to reflect on the last pod we did, which I think was one of our best ever, and it's got lots of great feedback with Dennis O'Brien. Thank you, Dennis. If you've started listening regularly, you're a legend. And so much so lots of people listened to it, and I just really enjoyed it. I mean, we covered so much stuff, and Dennis, he's a sort of very well-off, very influential person, and yet he just spoke like he was down the pub, which I really appreciated. And I didn't just appreciate it, so did the Irish Independent, which is one of their proper main newspapers, isn't it?
They liked his colourful use of language.
Yeah. They put some asterisks in, but I'm going to read it as if the asterisks aren't there. So this is the headline from
you
the
don't
Irish...
do it in an Irish accent, though.
No.
But you do Scottish accents. You must be able to do it.
Shall I do it as Neil McRae? Yeah. Dennis O'Brien labels Google and Meta as greedy fucks and says telecoms operators are bollocks. No, even that.
So Neil's gonna hear that and think, what's going on?
No, this has actually got nothing to do with Neil McRae. It's just that I saw him yesterday, so I got a chance to refresh my Neil McRae accent. So yes, this is the Irish Independent headline with some asterisks with the swear words. But it's Dennis O'Brien labels Google and Meta as, quote, greedy fucks, close quote, and says telecoms operators are, quote, bollocks.
That really has got to be done with an Irish accent, that word.
Bollocks.
Yeah.
Bollocks.
I first heard bollocks as a verb, I think in Father Ted. No, not as a verb. Just in an ungrammatical way. I think there's one time when Father Dougal was talking about Bishop Brennan and he called him Len and he went, "I'm a bishop, you little bollocks."
I picture Brendan Gleeson saying that.
Celtic swearing on the whole, especially Scottish and Irish, is just pro. It's so good.
It was almost designed for them.
Yeah. And I'll read anyway. And this is so. And this, so then the first paragraph of this Irish Independent thing, which was written yesterday by Adrian Weckler, says Dennis O'Brien says that European telecoms operators are bollocks and that telecoms industry is now shite. And in an interview with the Telecoms.com podcast, no hyperlink, boo.
Yeah.
Mr. O'Brien also heavily criticised tech giants such as Meta and Google, calling them greedy fucks and saying they deprive third world countries of revenue. And then it goes on a fair bit. And obviously just loves the swearing. And then
It's quite interesting that they make those points, isn't it? Because we're going to talk about that very issue.
We are. And then there was another one. By the way, we know about these both because they were shared by John Strand, who's the person who introduced us to Dennis.
He's getting another mention.
Well, he's getting a mention. He was at the thing yesterday.
I know he is, but there's got to be one of these, I reckon, we do where we don't mention John.
People are going to think we're in love.
Yeah.
And so a partially paywalled site called thecurrency.news wrote something with a headline, and they didn't use asterisks, so fair play to them. Their headline was, "The telecoms business is bollocksed everywhere." Quote, "Dennis O'Brien on absentee regulators mollycoddled plutocrats and his rise and fall in the Caribbean." And then it says, and I quite like this.
I like the way he teed it up.
Yeah, I like the way. So his first paragraph, he said, a Dennis O'Brien interview is a rare thing. It's even rarer for O'Brien to sit in front of a microphone for 2 hours with a couple of beers. What follows are selected highlights from O'Brien's interview with the Telecoms.com podcast. Again, no hyperlink. What's wrong with these people? And he chats amiably and frankly, blah, 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 and then you get to the paywall quite soon after that, which aren't too much.
I mean, I'm guessing it's more of the similar
similar stuff
thing that he's that's been covered in the Irish Independent, probably quite heavy on quotes.
And, anyway, but I think it's the first time this pod has made it into like the mainstream media and been reported on.
I mean,
so
I guess
quite cool.
It's probably not too dissimilar to having someone like Richard Branson or something like that maybe on. And see what the reaction would be.
Can we get Elon Musk? Let's get Elon Musk.
Do you know what I mean?
Well, I mean, anyone like that's going to
he'll go on anything these days.
But I mean, I'm trying to think of something.
He just told Disney to go and fuck themselves.
Bob, hey Bob.
Yeah.
That was so awkward and so bad.
I didn't actually watch it. Was it awkward in the room when he said it?
Alone on Earth on this video.
Right, and he's just raging at all his antagonists. Sorry, what were you saying?
I was just saying it's probably like having somebody who's famous in the country. He's very well known in Ireland because he's this sort of slightly controversial figure.
Yeah,
who's involved.
Oligarch's a lazy term, but he's up there in terms of wealth and influence as an oligarch.
He certainly was a few years ago. I think, according to some Forbes entry, he was up there in the.
He certainly had to take a bit of a haircut with Digicel, as he admitted on the podcast, didn't he?
But I think because of his.
I think he's still doing all right.
Well, the fact that he flies around in a private jet and has drivers are allowed to wait for him outside for a couple of hours.
Well, the estimate is $3 billion.
Right.
So that's
right for $3 billion. That'll do.
Mm-hmm. But if we had someone who's in the UK who's a similar kind of figure that he is in Ireland, and I can only think of people like Branson maybe or. Maybe what's his
or back in the 80s, someone like Alan Sugar.
Yes, I wanted to say Alan Sugar.
Not today,
not
but
so much now,
a few decades ago.
But if you had someone like that, when he was a bit more substantial, maybe then you probably get a similar pickup.
I've got to admit, and this is my failing, I knew very little about Dennis O'Brien until John flagged him up. And then obviously I did a bit of research, although as I famously admitted, my research consisted of putting Dennis O'Brien into Google and finding his website.
Yeah.
And there was some stuff, I'm not going to get into it now, there was some stuff from decades ago that we could have got into, and some people wondered why we didn't. Just to clarify to anyone who listens to the pod what my philosophy is for a podcast. Yes, we're both journalists, but a podcast is a recorded conversation. And as I said to Ian offline, I wouldn't pick any kind of angle or avenue or line of conversation with someone on the podcast that I wouldn't do if I was just meeting them in a pub. It's supposed to be a chat.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we'll go to a pub and disagree, and that's fine if we disagree.
Yeah.
But you don't set up a sort of conversational meeting as an adversarial thing.
Yeah, I mean, as he's not on it now, I can sort of frame it a bit more. That what happened in the 90s when he obtained a telecom license, there were allegations of impropriety and money changing hands with politicians and this sort of thing.
Which has obviously been fully explored over time.
It was explored in something I think called the Moriarty Commission or Tribunal.
All right, so it was a proper event.
Yep, you can look it up on Wikipedia and everything. I thought it wasn't. There were two reasons I thought it probably wasn't worth asking about, because I think we did ask him some tough questions about other subjects, but I didn't think it was worth it. Partly because of what you've just said. If we'd said let's go over your history and started with that, he wouldn't probably have wanted to.
It would have been a
different. 2 hours.
It would have been a different conversation.
It's not like doorstepping somebody at a press conference.
And someone's. I think they are a guest.
Yeah.
So I treat him as a guest.
And the other reason is it's quite old and it's been explored a lot in the past anyway by journalists. So it just seems like going over something that's
exactly.
along. So I think one of the other things that I wanted to say as well is get the feeling from someone whose comments were made on the pod that we let him off towards the end a bit on some of his views about things like slavery reparations,
right?
Which is quite a controversial issue, isn't it? This idea that rich countries that were sort of involved in the slave trade should still be compensating Caribbean nations, and he's obviously quite a big supporter of this idea. If you're going to be cynical, you could say, well, he's trying to curry favour in the market that he operates in.
Well, and I think we did what we did explore in the latter half of the pod quite a lot is this intersection between business and cold-blooded capitalism and then philanthropic stuff.
Yeah, and I have. I don't think that's as clear cut as he was sort of making out. I think there's lots of sort of issues.
What you mean, all the reparations, all that?
Yeah, completely. I don't think it's a good idea to be asking generations after the event who'd had nothing to do with it to be coughing up money for this sort of thing.
No, well, we'll go on this tangent, and we won't go on long because obviously it's got nothing to do with telecoms.
But that was the other reason. It had nothing to do with telecoms, and he said it at 2 hours in. So what are we going to do? Start a conversation.
And we were
about
2 hours in,
and
we got to I need a slash o'clock.
Yeah.
And do you know what I found? What I found is because I try and be open and receptive to these things. Yeah, some of the stuff he was saying about how certain places do get exploited.
Yeah.
I wouldn't. Some people try and reframe that as like modern colonialism. I don't think that's an appropriate word. But there's no doubt that parts of the world, like Africa, do get exploited, and the people who extract wealth from it, whether it's mineral wealth or any other kind of wealth, probably don't pay tax there or enough tax and all that sort of thing. There's lots of good. Even as the sort of free marketeer that I am, I think there are still good discussions to have about, for want of a better word, fairness in business. But yes, to your point about that particular one, how we're going to go down that rabbit hole 2 hours in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
No, totally.
And it's not telecom specific as well. It's very much not a telecom thing. So.
But as I made clear to Dennis when I was seeing him out, and if you listen to this, Dennis, you're welcome back any time because that's just basically it's great pod.
Yeah.
At the end of the day. So, but yes, I love that coverage we got. It's going to my head. I feel like I'm a
also apparently we were on Irish radio.
Oh yes, you said.
Yeah.
Because you know someone who listens to Irish radio.
So my neighbour's Irish and happens to be the brother of a guy called Declan Conway, who so he's Brendan Conway, my neighbour.
Your neighbour won't mind you name checking him on the pod.
I'm pretty sure he wouldn't. No.
Okay.
Shout out.
Well, it's a bit late because you've done it now.
I've done it now. So his brother's Declan Conway, who started a company called OpenNet with Joe Hogan, I think.
Yeah, we met Joe Hogan.
Yeah.
You were there when
I haven't met Joe Hogan.
You didn't come on that island trip
I didn't.
when we did a pod in the pub with Niall Norton.
Jamie.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Jamie.
Because
Jamie falling asleep and staring at his phone.
OpenNet's was an Irish sort of BSS company that eventually got acquired by Amdocs, but they kind of knew a bit about Dennis O'Brien, so I sort of chatted to the two of them first, and then they were interested in knowing about the pod, obviously, and wanted to listen to it. So, but because Brendan listens to Irish radio, I think they picked it up as well, and we're chatting about it this morning apparently. So
awesome.
That's quite nice to know.
Go us. I mean, really, it's not about us, it's about Dennis, but still, go us anyway. Cool. So, so that's that. Before I get into the main segment of it, Pierre, you were sharing some stats you saw, like end-of-year stats about the pod. Was it from Spotify?
Yes. So, I mean, there's a lot of stuff, they do the wrap-up thing. But so here, the key things is, and this is for Spotify specifically in 2023, 75% of listeners discovered us this year.
That's pretty good, that.
We were in 80 countries.
So 75% of the people who listened this year discovered us this year?
Yeah, because remember, we joined Spotify only a while ago.
During 75% of all listeners came
on
through
Spotify.
This year as well.
On Spotify.
On Spotify.
Yeah, on Spotify.
Right. It's all Spotify specific stuff.
I would say Spotify is probably the smallest bit of people that...
Okay.
I don't know.
Well, that's good that it's gone up that much, though.
Yeah. And so there's been lots of sharing over WhatsApp and direct links, so thank you for sharing.
Cool.
Plus 61% of followers. So that's great.
So we're 61% up on Spotify this year.
On followers. Yeah.
On followers.
Yeah, which means like whenever
which means they get it. Yeah, they subscribe to it effectively.
60% joined us for the first time this year. Cool. And we were the top 10 podcast for nearly 1,000 people. Only for Spotify. So that's good.
That's good.
Yeah.
1,000 people.
That's pretty good.
In their top 10.
Yeah.
That's fucking great. Hurrah for us. I'll drink to that. Yeah. Actually, another shout out to Dennis. As well as buying us those nice bottles of wine, he brought a bunch of beers last time, and we're still getting through them. This is Orbit Ivo Pale Ale. And what have you got there? You got Orbit Peel,
Orbit Peel, Belgian
Ale. And what have you got? Beer?
More Beer Company.
Mordor beer.
More beer. All right, more beer. I think that's a good name. That's a good name for anything. More.
Yeah.
Right. So, why are we knackered? We're knackered. I've had a particularly hectic week because we've had a site migration of Telecoms.com onto the same platform that Light Reading migrated to a couple of months ago or so, wasn't it? So we're all...
Feels like it's been longer.
Yeah. We're all part of Informa, and this is like an Informa-wide thing where everyone's going to this new platform, and I won't get into the minutiae of it. But... You know, when you do a site migration, it's quite fraught. There's so many things can go wrong. There's so many moving parts. There's so many stakeholders and all that sort of thing. And that all came to a head this week. And actually, perhaps largely because Light Reading came before us, it went fairly smoothly for us because I think you ironed out a lot of the kinks. So thanks, Light Reading. Thanks, Phil Harvey.
We were the guinea pigs.
Yeah. So, yes. So, yeah, so all the stress you've had.
Thanks for testing it on Light Reading first, guys.
Yeah, exactly. to minimise my stress. But I did have a particularly busy week because yesterday I hosted not one but 2 events. So we had... I
thought you did a terrific job as well.
Oh, thank you, mate. We had the Glowtels, which is our annual awards thing. And we have that as a big glitzy evening. It was in a new location. I thought the location was pretty good.
I liked it.
Plasterers Hall.
Yeah.
Is that how you pronounce it? Was it
certainly
Plasterers. Yeah, Plastered Hall. Well, I couldn't get plastered for a while because I was up on stage. So performing in inverted commas.
Like a monkey.
Yeah. Wind up monkey drummer. What was I going to say? Yeah. And so the format is that at the start of the evening, I do a welcome and just have some sort of whimsical Telecoms, it's a funny old game type of stuff. And then I've always found that I can pad out that speech by talking over our most read stories of the year. In fact, I'll quickly recap on them now. I think our third most read story of the year was one from earlier this week, which was that AT&T and Verizon shareholders are suing T-Mobile for just existing because they reckon, I mean, specifically they're talking about the merger with T-Mobile and Sprint because they reckon it's sent their prices up. And it's such a speculative, vexatious thing. I mean, having said that, they might win and then I'll look a twat, but I still think it's a really dodgy thing.
Yeah.
So that was our third.
You can sue for anything in the US, just about, doesn't it?
Yes. Well, they don't mind a bit of litigation in the States, to be fair. And then the second most read one was about Huawei launching a phone when America's supposed to have starving them of chips. Mm-hmm. And the first most read one...
come back into the news recently, hasn't it, that issue? There was a big FT piece on it, I remember.
Okay.
It seemed to be a bit late to it, but...
Well, maybe it could be that America's finally going... Because basically...
I saw something about Apple, an article on, I think the Times were like, Apple better watch out, for Huawei. Something like that.
Right. Well, I mean, it's basically what America's trying to do in starving China and its companies like Huawei of access to technology is a bit of a game of whack-a-mole. Because every time they come up with some new embargo, some new list of shit that China can't have, then they just sort of evolve around it. They maneuver around it. And it works the other way. Like NVIDIA, which is just going from strength to strength. We still should have bought NVIDIA shares even when they were big. They still keep going up. They've...
Yeah, its earnings were ridiculous, though.
I know,
absolutely
it was
ridiculous.
sick.
What happened to net income and everything
right.
was just stupid.
Yeah. Jensen Huang is laughing.
And if you look at their margins now, which is a sign of, I always think it's quite telling when people have like ridiculously fat profit margins in terms of what it says about the state of competition. And
yes,
they're just able to charge so much.
Yeah.
Stuff that's in short supply as well. And
it's pretty much all the AI gold rush for them, isn't it?
It is. From what I understand, it's hyperscalers going after these GPUs to put in their data centers for large language model training.
Yeah.
I think that's the main driver.
And And so one of the ways in which America's trying to make China not be so good at AI, which I think in the case of AI is a real shutting the stable door off the horse's bolted, because I think China's pretty awesome at AI already. And they, from what I read, they're more advanced on general AI as opposed to generative. It's a bit annoying that they're both going with gen.
Yeah.
But general AI is proper Terminator AI.
Well, that's actually AI. I don't think generative AI is AI.
No, it's just very clever.
It's clever analytics.
Yeah. Anyway, but
isn't this like going to be a bubble, like the .com bubble?
Could be.
Where only 5% of AI companies will remain.
Richard Windsor, who I think is very good.
Yeah, I agree. I'd love to get him on the pod one day.
Used to be a Nomura analyst, but now has his own thing called Radio Free Mobile. He's brilliant, I think, his analysis. He's very sort of to the point.
He just does one topic a day, but really nails it.
Yeah, he really nails it. And he thinks it's a bubble. He thinks that there will be he thinks that a lot of the stuff about large language models is been overhyped. You know, he's not saying it's complete rubbish, but he's quite skeptical of the usefulness of generative AI in terms of like the fear factor, you know, that it's going to replace people. You know, he often sort of puts out opinions about the limits of it and it getting stuff wrong, and he thinks a lot of this, what's going on at the moment, is a bubble, and that we'll see because I think the problem at the moment is the only company that really seems to be doing very well out of it is Nvidia.
Yeah.
Whereas the actual
Microsoft doing really well.
Well, we sort of touched on that on the Dennis O'Brien pod with all the OpenAI.
But they're not making money. That's the thing. It's expectations that have boosted their share price because of their involvement with OpenAI. But OpenAI they're not making money from this stuff.
In a way, it's
not in an actual revenue as opposed to increased valuation. Yeah.
So and trying to I think monetize some of these large language models. That's the word, isn't it? Monetize. You know.
Yeah.
Sell stuff basically.
Commercialize whatever.
Commercialize generative AI. I think it's
so like you would pay so that your company would be recommended in an answer or something.
Or the other way around, you pay for it as a premium tool.
Yeah, of course,
yeah.
Like
you plug it into your system.
You can do that, yeah. I can see that happening, but
well, you can always do that. Yeah.
A lot of the Chat GPT stuff's obviously just been people using this for free, hasn't it? It's not like my son when he's trying to, you know, write a paragraph and not getting very far, and he goes, "Oi, I need a paragraph on why Apple's not very good at doing baseband processors." Or modems, rather, isn't it? That's the issue.
Apparently, they gave up on the 5G
modems.
They gave up on the 5G modem.
Yes, exactly. Right. Oh, is that news this week?
I think so. Yeah.
Oh, I missed that completely. So they're no longer trying to replace Qualcomm.
Yeah.
Did you see that?
So I just got a text from Simon Evans, so I thought I'd better read that. Tell me, who's doing
Apparently,
what to who?
Pierre's just told us that Apple's given up on trying to do a modem.
Yeah, I don't want to
5G
talk
modem,
shit, but I think that's what they did.
I mean, I certainly know there have been stories about them struggling.
Well, they have
struggled. I haven't seen...
Because they renewed that deal with Qualcomm for
I hadn't seen an inflection point of them going, do you know what, fuck it.
No, I hadn't seen that either. But anyway, so back on the generative AI, I think he's been quite sceptical, Richard Windsor, and I think he's often spot on about things, and he's a very thoughtful analyst. So, Anyway, okay. What was your other one?
Well, actually, let's close off that Apple thing, because I just Googled it. So here's...
this is the most random pod ever. It's a very appropriate hungover pod.
Yeah, so in case
I'll just send you the article that I saw.
In case... So I found it, mate. I'm miles ahead of you. I found it on Apple Insider. Okay. And he sent me Mac Rumors. Let's compare them. Yeah. Ian and I each got about 3 hours sleep last night.
Yeah.
We finally...
That's why we don't sound very coherent.
We finally stopped dicking at about 3 a.m. And then
it's according to unconfirmed reports coming out of Asia. So take it with a pinch of salt.
So that's your one there. So a new report, relayed by regular leaker, who's got one of these names with numbers on the end. So okay. So that bit needs verifying. That thing coming out of East Asia has not been solidly verified. But their headline is "Confusion Reigns about the future of Apple's 5G modem project." And then what Pierre just sent me says Apple to discontinue custom 5G. So they've gone a bit harder, Mac Rumors. Let's see.
Claim reports.
Yeah.
Claim
really
reports.
Big story.
Yeah.
That's almost worth talking about in itself.
Well, we could. Because there's been fuck all news. So
saving the day here.
So let's just be really meandering and tangential. We're tired.
Yeah.
Just indulge us, podcast listeners.
Basically, we're tired because we went out after the Globetel Awards.
Yeah. So So Globetel Awards. Oh, I'll bring it back a little bit, but put a pin in that Apple thing. I'll keep it up on the screen. So I did the Globetel thing. So I have to stand up and do that speech at the start where I do those top 3 articles of the year on Telecoms.com. Then we sit down and we all have dinner. And I've got to give a shout out. My guests were Anais, Chloe, Katie, and Amy from CC Group. Thanks a lot for coming. They're all out on the lash on their CC Group Christmas larks today. Yeah.
Oh, they did say that. I forgot.
Oh, they probably saved themselves last night then.
Yeah, maybe
that'll be one of the reasons they didn't stay to the bitter end. And then that got wrapped up by about midnight, the Globetel. So we did all that. Yeah, we have the dinner, and then I stand up there. We had our guest was Simon Evans, the guy who just texted me, because I hang out with celebs now. That's what I do.
Yeah. Dennis O'Brien one day, Simon Evans the next.
Yeah. Who is it? Someone said, who's Simon Evans? Is he that sweaty guy? And I had a little think, and I was thinking, no, it's Lee Evans they were thinking of. No, we don't have sweaty people at the Glotels. And he won't listen to this, but thanks a lot, Simon. I thought you were great, but it was quite interesting. The crowd didn't initially warm to his act, did they?
I think to be honest with you, I think it's really difficult for stand-up comedians in that crowd, because when you pay to go and see a stand-up comedian, you know you're getting your fans going along and what kind of comedy it is, where he's just going into a room of a very diverse room as well. We had people from China there, people from Japan there, Europeans there.
I would say the minority of the room are primary English speakers, native English speakers.
I think so, yeah. So it's to do it to an international audience, I think, is really, really tricky.
Yeah.
Unless they've gone looking for it and they know what to expect, then that's a tall order.
That'll be a good note for the next comedian.
I
think it is. I mean, I did give him, with all due respect to the Glotel's audience, I did give him the feedback beforehand that the audience is quite passive. Because last year, Jeff Norcott tried a bit of crowd work and he was getting fuck all back from the audience.
Yeah.
So I said to Simon, I wouldn't bother with crowd work if I were you. And he went, actually, it's not one of my big things anyway.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, other things about Simon is his humour, which I really love, but it's that type of humour where he deliberately sets up his bits in a sort of, oh shit, where's he going with this?
Yeah.
Like, is he about to be racist or is he about to be bigoted in some way?
Yeah.
And of course, in our multinational room, that's especially sensitive. So I think there's a bit of that. But I think the biggest one, because a lot of people in there weren't English speakers, Simon talks moderately fast, but he's also very articulate and uses quite a lot of elaborate language.
He does, yeah.
And I reckon half the time people just didn't know what the fuck he was talking about.
I think that was a problem.
Yeah.
He is quite a sort of, big words, sort of eloquent.
Yes.
But you need to sort of have your vocab.
Definitely.
To hand. You need to have your Roger's thesaurus to hand if you're not a native speaker.
Well, he is a very erudite guy. I actually know him as much from his like current affairs writing and podcasting and stuff as I know him from his comedy. Anyway. So then that's the end of the night. And I have to sort of I'll have a couple of glasses of wine, but I can't be mashed up there on stage. I'm up there for like 2 hours or something, aren't I?
Yeah, well, you were sort of on from 10 in the morning.
We'll get on to how busy my day was in a minute. And then we have about an hour or two of just hanging out afterwards, and we have these little casino tables with play money and all that sort of thing. And Simon, it was really cool. I really appreciate it. He actually hung around and had a chat after, which often the comedians just want to bail straight away, which I totally respect as well.
Yeah.
But it's a bonus when they do hang around. So that was cool. And then it got to about midnight. And, with me, it's not like you, where you've been able to drink as much as you want. I've got to not be mashed when I'm up on stage. So then when I'm finally off duty, I'm taking a run up at it. And it got to about midnight. I was like, I'm not ready to go home. Oh, yeah. And the other thing, I got to... When you get a comedian, you nearly always find some kind of accommodation for them to hang out in between the rehearsal and then when they actually come on, because there's usually a few hours of that. And the venue we're at is not attached to a hotel, so we booked a separate hotel. It's about 10 minutes walk away for him, but he wasn't going to crash there, so I just got a key off him. And I had that as a place to crash last night. So I was doubly keen to just stay out because I didn't even need to worry about getting home.
Yeah.
So anyway, and we ended up finding a place called Dirty Martini, and we stayed there till 3 a.m.
Yeah.
And then I sort of...
We got kicked out.
Yeah. We were like the last... They're like, what are those people still sitting there for?
Why is he wearing a tux?
Yeah, I know. They're weird. Get them out of here. And then there was a bit of faffing while people were trying to get Ubers and all that sort of thing. You nearly flounced home because the Uber was dicking you about, which I think you would have regretted. Yeah, no, I'm not saying you're wrong.
Yeah.
I'm saying that
getting an Uber in central London is a pain.
To be honest, it wasn't that bad.
Okay.
I've had incidents before. I think just after the pandemic, when there was a massive shortage of drivers.
Yeah.
And it was that you were waiting half an hour, 40 minutes. And
I ended up
give up at that stage.
One of the reasons I got to bed so late, even though I was crashing in London, is some of our other friends who were out were trying to get Ubers, and that was taking ages. And they're both women. I didn't want to leave them by themselves, so I just stayed with them till the bitter end, till the last one got in a cab, and then I schlepped off to the hotel. I didn't get to bed till about 4:30, and I thought, I'll set my alarm. I'll give myself a little bit of breathing room in the morning. But Andrew's off today, so I had to be up and working. But I ended up waking up at 7:30 anyway.
Yeah, well, I do that in hotel rooms.
Yeah,
I actually woke up quite late today for me.
I had 3 hours kip, so I'm a little bit rough around the edges, a bit loose.
Yeah.
So that was that. That was the awards. But I thought the awards went really well. I really enjoyed it. Each year I'm up there because obviously I'm not like a professional performer like Simon Evans or whoever. But I've done it so many years now that I genuinely don't get at all nervous going up there, and I feel perhaps too relaxed. I don't know. You be the judge.
I thought you did really well. You didn't look. You don't look nervous.
No. I was worried like the other way of getting a bit too cocky and all that sort of thing.
No, I thought it worked really well. I think that you probably got more laughs than Simon, actually, in a way.
Well,
because
and I was aware of this when I was up with Jeff last year. While I'm not the professional comedian, it is my home turf, and it's not their home turf.
Yeah.
So I'm reading out all the shortlisted ones, and some of the shortlisted entries were so long.
I was laughing at that bit. I thought you did the reading out of the funny names. They're not funny names. They're just they come across
I know
like overly sort of lengthy descriptions.
I know, and ones where they have an acronym and then in brackets they expand the acronym.
So we had a game at our table while you were doing it of trying to guess who was going to win, because I genuinely didn't know who the winners were.
No, we keep it very secret.
And I got a lot of them right.
Ah,
yeah,
fair play.
Yeah, I was quite impressed at my ability to get them right. So maybe I know what I'm doing after all. Maybe I'll be keeping tabs on this tech stuff.
There's an outside chance that you know what you're doing. And I read out all the shortlists and the name of the entries because I don't think it's fair on the comedian. There's a hell of a lot of stuff. There's arcane stuff. There's a lot of stuff coming from East Asia, which takes a bit of practicing to pronounce properly and all that sort of thing. But and there's 24 of them. So by the end of it, I'm reading all those out, and then we have photos with the winners, and by the end of it, I'm just like ready to just go for it. So, but that was really good fun. And just before I move on from the Glow Tales, unless you've got anything else to say about it, just want to thank everyone involved, all our team. I mean, they probably won't listen to this podcast, but I'm the one up there on stage. But it's amazing with not that many people. Shout out to Informer in general on that one. With not many people, I think we come up with an awards event that looks like a lot more people worked on it than they actually did.
Yeah.
In other words, I think everyone kind of punches above their weight in terms of productivity on the whole thing. So
I thought it was really good. I liked the venue a lot.
Yeah,
the meal was really good, and I know everybody didn't think it was brilliant, but I thought it was really, really nice.
Yeah, well, I mean, to serve up 100 bits of lamb and they're all pink.
Yeah, I like that kind of thing. So it's for me, that's red meat with done with the sort of pink inside is perfect. And I just thought the food was really good. I thought it was a really nice venue.
No, I do hope if I've got any say in it, we'll go back to the same place next year. That's for sure. So that was that, and then, but that was actually my second event of the day, because immediately beforehand, in the same venue, we had an event which is a kind of reheat of something that used to be a light reading thing, which is called Future Vision Executive Summit, is what you used to call it, didn't you?
Well, that's what we're calling it now, isn't it?
So what did you used to call it?
We used to call it Vision 2020.
Vision 2020.
It seemed like a really good idea
until 2020 came. Yeah. You're like, we can't call it that in 2020.
And then we couldn't do it anyway.
Yeah. And total credit to light reading, especially when Ray was running it, and Steve Saunders. He obviously deserves credit as well. Yeah. that was all really good, and this was like a sort of miniature version of it. But the point of the thing, and I'm not going to go. I'm not going to talk about.
It could go on to be bigger, something bigger. Let's hope. I think
so.
Done well.
I think so. And Ian was an intrinsic part of it as well. So thanks a lot, Ian. I'm not going to go into too much detail about precisely what was said on the day, because it's Chatham House rules, and so the whole point is that people can feel free to talk about it. And I'm not going to go on about it on a podcast, for example.
Yeah.
But I think what we can do without violating Chatham House rules, Ian, is once I've teed it up, we can talk about what we took away from the day.
Yeah.
And we just won't mention. I mean, do you know what? I mean, I think let's just not bother even mentioning who was there. It's a matter of public record. You can find it on the internet if you want to know who was there. I'm not going to risk screwing up by even naming any names. But the point of the event was to have lots of industry luminaries, and I thought we had a great lineup of people. Without naming any names, look it up. Future Vision.
I mean, to sort of say who they were, there were sort of CTO level people on the telco side. Or people of that level on the telco side,
from quite a few
of them, and then you had some like really top analysts,
exactly,
and a couple of people from the vendor community. Did we have, or did we sort of avoided vendors, didn't we? Really on the panels and stuff. I think so. It's a really good mix of analysts and actual operators.
And actually, I had one panel. Again, I'm not going to name any names, but I'm going to tease it. I had one panel where everyone on the panel has been on this pod at least once.
Yeah.
So that was cool. Because I had a hand in the speaker recruitment, because that's one of the handy things about doing this job. We get to meet all these people.
Yeah.
If I could have, I would have got Dennis Bryan to turn up. And anyway, so I'm just going to tee it up and then I'm going to hand it over to you, because as usual I've been banging on for ages at the start of the pod. So the point of it was just to have, and the reason it's Chatham House rules is to just have open discussion. In a way, it was just meant to be done in the style of this podcast, where it's just open discussion about the telecoms industry, but it's limited formatting, limited parameters. You're just, and we're just trying to get into like the meaty subject matter and just sort of thrash it out. And I thought it was a really good day. I think I agree. It could be bigger, and hopefully we'll build on that. It could be bigger in terms of the amount of people in the room, and hopefully we'll build on that. But yeah, so I just had a really busy day, and Ian was involved in the first event. Second event, your job was just to sit near me when I was speaking and laugh at my jokes.
Yeah.
I had one bit on the Glowtails. I can't remember. I made some little witticism, and it gave Ian the giggles. And he started setting me off, and I thought, shit, am I have a giggling fit up here on stage? And I had to just start looking away from you and just thinking of England.
You mean the football team?
Yeah, because if I looked at you, I was just going to get set off. But during the day, you had a more active role. You did one interview. We did a recording of, well, not a recording. We did a live podcast just for the people in the room.
Yeah.
And that was all really good. So yeah, I'll stop banging on. So what I'm going to ask, just to protect ourselves from screwing up.
Is that podcast going to turn up in the future, 20 years' time, like a bootleg sort of?
Right.
It's the one they did that wasn't released, and it was under Chatham House rules at the time. It's someone had a tape recorder at the back.
Like an undiscovered Beatles track.
I wish.
Yeah, do you know what I mean?
That it would be that way.
Don't worry, podcast world. We're not that up our own arses. So to re-establish the Chatham House rules guardrails, I'm going to ask you, Ian, just what you took from the day in terms of the subject matter we discussed.
Well, I thought it was good on the big theme, the big topics, because sometimes tech and telecom conferences, I think, can go too much into the weeds without relating that back to why we should care. It's like wood for the trees type stuff. And I thought this did a really good job of exploring the headline issues, really. Like the business model doesn't look particularly good at the moment in terms of flat sales.
In fact, it's bollocksed.
It's bollocksed. As Dennis O'Brien would put it, it's bollocksed, because it's all, we've signed up everybody we possibly can now. And that's been the situation for years. We don't make more money from
there was some talk, again, I'm going to reiterate, sorry for talking over you, mate. That's another thing tiredness does. It sort of disinhibits me a bit more. There was one talk about how the direction ARPU's gone over the past few decades. Were you just leading up to that? Sorry.
Yeah, sort of, I guess. I guess it's the point that you roll out these higher speed technologies, whether it be 5G or fibre, and people aren't really paying any more money for them. You know, they're if anything, they're paying less. The ARPU trend's been sort of down from the 2G days. I think we used to pay a lot for phone services at one time.
Oh, it was quite a status symbol.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned this on the pod we did there, which I can probably say because it was
just us.
It was just us, and it's not like exposed. It was me ruminating on my son's situation in the US about trying to get a prepaid deal and ending up having, because you pay a lot more over there. So this is particularly noticeable in Europe, which is very competitive. My youngest son is on a deal where he pays £12 a month at the moment, and he gets 10 gigabytes.
This is in the UK.
This is in the UK, and unlimited voice and text with.
I think that's what I get.
Yeah, with O2, which is bloody brilliant for a consumer. But you think for a telco that's rolling out this extremely expensive stuff with massive MIMO radios and spending lots of money and having this workforce of engineers and technicians and incredibly skilled software people, you know, this is the sad thing for them, really, is this perception about them being kind of utilities, which in a way they are. But to compare them to a water company where probably the infrastructure doesn't really change very much and become more innovative in a sort of 5 to 10 year cycle. I'm not saying it doesn't need upgrading and replacing, but it's not like someone's going, oh, these water pipes are going to be able to do this that the last ones couldn't. You know, this really is clever science, what these guys are doing, and yet they're not sort of making more money from it. And I've got some sympathy to that. Now, their solutions to that are one of the big topics
we can get into
of the show, which is,
and that's actually also relevant to the Dennis O'Brien pod as well.
So there was a lot of discussion about things like net neutrality and fair contribution. You know,
that one
the idea
is
that
what
big tech should be contributing to these costs, and talk of things which I'm a bit more positive about, even though I'm not sure they're going to work out, but I'm more positive about them in the sense that I think it's good to be discussing revenue growth from something you're doing, rather than trying to just get money from somebody else because you feel that they aren't paying their way. And,
well, exactly. I do think. I mean, I thought of framing it that way when I was chatting yesterday. Again, I can refer to myself without breaching Chatham House rules. It almost. And I thought it took on this this aspect a little bit with Dennis as well. It almost gets into a political thing, like left wing versus right wing, high tax, low tax, redistribution versus laissez-faire, all that sort of stuff. And what people like Dennis and some other arguments, you could frame it as, this is basically a bit socialist. It's basically redistribution.
It is.
And look, I'm willing to have a debate about that. I'm not so dogmatic. And for example, I don't think, and I think I said this in the last pod, I don't think there shouldn't be some redistribution of wealth. I don't think there shouldn't be a social safety net. Like I said, my daughter has autism. We get some extra help from the state for that. I'm grateful for it.
Yeah.
And so I think anyone who's ever received any help from the state would be a hypocrite to begrudge paying any tax and all that sort of thing.
This is where I'm sympathetic. So I think one of the things that came up yesterday, this idea that big tech are sort of freeloaders, you know, and they go around taking advantage of things and riding on the back of systems and not really contributing. I've got a little bit of sympathy for that, in the sense that you get these very clever tax lawyers working for your company and working out how we can avoid
offshoring and
all this kind of stuff. Now, it's not illegal, you know, but it's arguably unethical, and I do have
it leaves a bad taste in your mouth.
It leaves a bad
when Amazon's
taste.
paying fuck all tax. For
completely.
example.
I totally understand the concern there, and I think when people like Dennis O'Brien say these guys, they come, you know, they make a lot of money from what they do in the Caribbean and from people using their services and stuff there, but they don't really give anything back. They offshore, like they claim they shouldn't be paying tax, and they have the guys to sort of back it up and do it in a kind of legal way. I get that. I get why there's a concern there, and I think things like that probably need to be looked at. I think the fair share notion is, to me, less convincing. I mean, I think we made our position probably. You know, we obviously want to listen to both sides and present both sides.
Well, the word fair antagonises.
But I think when we're doing our opinion analysis pieces, we're both probably not too sympathetic towards that.
Yeah, well, I don't like the word fair partly because it's subjective and nebulous and ill-defined.
Were you convinced at all? Did yesterday change your views on it? Because you're more in my way of thinking about this. But did it change your thinking at all yesterday?
So there are two things I would use to characterise it, and they came up, and I'm just going to give my thoughts on these things. One, and Dennis brought this up. Basically, the industry's fucked and bollocksed and all that. The business model's broken. It's shite.
Yeah.
The business model's broken. That's enough of my shit Irish swearing. The business model's broken. ARPUs are going down. Costs, if they're not going up, basically the margins are squeezing. And it's very hard to get much money out of telecoms right now. So it's broken. Then you get onto whose fault is it that's broken. Now, Dennis himself said it's mainly the operator's fault. So that's fine. So if we go with Dennis's...
Although his argument there seems to be that he feels they didn't put enough pressure on big tech earlier. Which I don't... I mean, I think it's their fault as well, but I don't go along with him on that. I think they could have done more innovative things at a time when Google and those guys were very, very small. I mean, when was Google founded? Like turn of the century, more or less? 99, 2000?
Yeah, I think we first started using it as a search engine around then, didn't we?
They didn't have any money
in the 2000s.
at all. They had some venture capital behind them. And the telcos at the time were huge. They were... You look at the share prices of companies
Cisco,
like... Cisco was a darling at that time.
Yeah, the dot-com bubble.
But I'm talking also about the operators. They were Telecom Italia, Telefonica. They were among the. They went up like that. Everybody was like trying to get in because there was this mobile phone boom. It's like Netflix signing up subscribers today. Nobody had a mobile phone. You've got millions of people you can go and sell mobile phones to and get subscription money from. You just rake it in. And everybody wants.
Where I'm sure Dennis was right in how he characterised it is. So you're quite rightly saying there was a time where the telcos were dominant and what we now think of as big tech wasn't big.
Yeah.
The problem is they were, just as Dennis characterised the big tech as greedy fucks, I think the telcos probably were. And this is the problem. They get hubristic. They're like, we're the big guys. We can call all the shots. We don't have to compromise. We don't have to revenue share. We don't have to partner with anyone.
Yeah.
And then suddenly they suddenly start bitching about OTTs about a decade or so ago. And then suddenly it's too late. So there's a lot of sort of timing. There was probably an optimal time where telcos could have seen the writing on the wall with the Googles of this world and gone, shit, it's time to move. And they were probably a mixture of lazy and hubristic and arrogant. But either way, so they're in trouble now, and we accept that. And to a certain extent, why they're in trouble is secondary, but it's fun to argue the toss about it.
Yeah.
But the bigger thing is, okay, whose problem is it to solve that?
Yeah.
Now, we all agree, this is something you asked me if I move it at all. I am slightly persuaded by some arguments. Again, I'm not going to name anyone because of the aforementioned Chatham House rules, but I'm persuaded by some arguments that telecoms is critical infrastructure. And if as a purely private enterprise, it's struggling to fulfill its critical infrastructure role, then some kind of intervention's called for. Now, the problem with the fair contribution one is that seems to be calling for a forced redistribution of money from big tech to telecoms to help solve this business model problem.
Well, I would say as well, do we because if the free market works as the free market should, and it's genuinely critical infrastructure and there's demand for it, then shouldn't the market be able to sort this out if it was left to its own devices?
In principle, yeah.
I mean, you don't want a monopoly emerging, but I think one of the reasons that European companies are in trouble, and complaining about margins and returns on investment is a particularly big theme. Whenever there's any grumbling to Ofcom, for instance, it's often on this return on capital employed metric that Vodafone and Three keep banging on about to try and justify their merger. But the rationale there,
on which more in a bit, we got something we can chat about on that.
But the rationale there is, well, we merge and we solve that problem. Then all of a sudden we can't moan about return on capital employed. So doesn't the issue of fair contribution go away at that point?
There's a hell of a lot of special pleading that comes from telcos. If it's not fair contribution And I think that the special pleading I'm most sympathetic towards, by the way, is to do with regulation. I think they probably are over-regulated now. And we could do with loosening up a little bit and helping them out on that front. And, no harm done there. Unless you're an AT&T or Verizon shareholder where you think any kind of regulatory loosening necessarily drives up your bills, which I'll be amazed if they're able to prove to a legally durable way.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I mean, so we've got this broken business model. One possible solution is to get big tech, which uses communication infrastructure a lot, especially the video streaming people. They use infrastructure a lot. Get them to chip in on the grounds that they're massive beneficiaries of this and they don't contribute directly to it.
Although what you've just said, some people would take massive issue with.
Yeah, well, I'm kind of, I'm still manning that point. It. Right. In what way? Elaborate on that.
This notion that the people who use it.
Yes.
Yeah. So some people would say the people who use it are you and me.
Exactly. Like, and I think that's a really good argument.
No one forces you to go and use a Netflix service, and Netflix doesn't use its own service. It just puts it out there for someone to use.
So it becomes as simple as pull versus push, doesn't it?
Yeah, but I think that's.
So are we pulling a Netflix video, or is Netflix pushing it to us? And in terms of demand, it's us that's.
It's us pushing. There's no doubt that it's us pulling it.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that is, to be quite honest with you, I think that's a really, 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 really big problem for the fair contribution argument. I think that's a fundamental point that some people, which I can name them,
we're skirting
we
around
almost
it.
Can actually, because they've talked about it.
Well, let's not do it just in case we fuck up. Yeah.
But some people have made the point that this calling, which turns up a lot in paperwork when the telcos put something out, Etno and these guys who were pushing for the idea of big tech to contribute to network costs. They use terminology like large traffic generators.
Yeah.
And the companies, Amazon and Netflix and Disney and all these guys themselves are not large traffic generators. They develop an application.
It's the end user that generates the traffic. Yeah.
And then you en masse are the large traffic generators.
Right.
And that's where
it's a cart before horse kind of thing.
It is. And I think, unfortunately, I think it's, there was also the point made, I think, that someone made about, if we're going to start blaming, the likes of Netflix and Amazon for causing all this demand, then do you go to Glastonbury and take a load of photos?
And wasn't the one that the biggest traffic generator of the year was the Queen's death?
Dying. So do we blame the Queen for dying?
Do we go after the royal family for some
Elton John, all these people are taking photos and uploading them onto the network. So, because of you and your
just
performance.
to pick holes in that one, I think it's a good for illustrative purposes, but I would say over the course of the whole year, I'm sure you can attribute a lot more traffic to Netflix than to the Queen's death. That was a single event.
Yeah.
But I take the point.
Yeah.
The point made there is where does it stop? When you start identifying large traffic generators, where does it stop?
But let's just to be silly, if there was a situation where Elton John went off on some tour and everywhere he turned up, there was this ridiculous situation.
Streaming
networks were really in trouble everywhere Elton John arrived because people, for some reason, they don't want to take photos of other performers. They just want to take photos of Elton John and upload them, and it's a huge problem.
Reason.
But wouldn't there then be well, Elton John's the guy who's causing all this trouble, but he's not actually. It's the guys photographing him and uploading it, and I think that's on the philosophical side. I think that's a big problem for the fair contribution guys.
So I agree with all of that. My only feeling is there some kind of regulatory intervention? So telecoms is heavily regulated. Big tech isn't.
Yeah.
Is there something we could do through the regulatory sphere that isn't quite as absolute as this wealth redistribution, which rankles with my sort of laissez-faire instincts, but is some kind of top-down state intervention, just in terms of maybe just shifting the goalposts in terms of regulation, giving some disadvantage or some greater advantage to telecoms or whatever. I don't know what that is. And obviously, if I had the solution, I'd be up there on these panels.
I mean, to me, I think it's easy. I think the only solution that needs to be thought of is all companies, all legacy companies, whether it's retail, there was a lot of talk about telecom being the most critical infrastructure, I noticed yesterday. I mean, to me, it isn't. Actually, I fundamentally disagree with that telecom is the most critical infrastructure. If you asked me what service, what utility do you use at home that you think you can make do without for 3 or 4 weeks, and you list the ones that you get: electricity in the winter, water coming through the taps, telecom. I'd probably scratch telecom, to be quite honest with you. I'd be quite happy to sit in a warm house. Sit in a warm house, read my book,
when you're getting into
TV,
old Maslow's hierarchy of needs, people joke that Wi-Fi is at the top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but that's a joke.
I didn't use telecom at all back in the 80s and 90s.
I used to Wi-Fi money on wine.
I used to make an occasional phone call to my grandmother when mum and dad went, "Oh, you haven't phoned your gran for ages," and thanked her for Christmas presents.
Thanks for presents.
That was it. I mean, so I don't.
You're being a dinosaur, Ian.
I know, but I get it. I'm being a bit facetious. I know it's important. It is really important. But those other companies the water companies are not in a very good state at the moment, are they? Thames Water.
No, the electricity ones, they keep going bust.
The electricity companies, look at all the problems they've had. These, and yet we need them. They're critical. We absolutely need them. And if you compare telcos to those organisations, they're actually not that badly off. What they haven't got is growth.
Yeah.
And they've got a couple of them in certain markets, they say, and actually the metrics do seem to back them up on this, and even the regulators agreeing in the UK, have this return on capital employed issue. But if that could be solved by a slightly more laissez-faire approach by the regulator on the issue of consolidation, rather than this insistence that you always have to have Thorn networks, and I think the point was also made yesterday that we've got this diversity of MVNOs in the market that cause a huge pricing problem, even though they don't, they put a lot of pricing pressure on
because the classic MVNO model is race to the bottom on price.
Yeah, I think Tesco was cited because I think it's the biggest UK MVNO.
That you get your mobile from the same place you get your bananas.
Someone said that people who sell bananas are better at selling mobile services than the operators are.
You know who the culprits are, Ian? It's the TV manufacturers and the phone manufacturers, because they make those 4K screens.
Right.
If they made standard definition a thing again, we could go back to standard definition.
So should we tax them?
I mean,
let's go back to standard definition TV.
I mean, that's another. But you could.
It would lower the bandwidth.
The rationale, you could make that argument. To me, that's the same kind of argument as the issue of So you could make that argument just as much as you can.
Or another one out of left field. Maybe you get subsidies for telcos to get better at compression. And then that solves some of their bandwidth problems. I don't know if there is headroom there, but just a thought.
Well, they moved to HEVC, which was like 50% more efficient than H.264, so they would lower the bandwidth. But
so there could be technological solutions.
It's like the analogy of the cars and the roads. The manufacturers make cars a certain way because they know it's going to be on slick asphalt.
Yeah.
If we had dirt roads, they would have to make them 4x4. Does that make sense? What I'm saying?
But
the car metaphor, Ian's used it plenty of times in the past. Do we charge BMW for road use and that sort of
rather than people driving?
Yeah.
But the other thing that I take issue with is this notion. I think this was discussed actually quite a bit. This idea that traffic generates cost. A lot of the lobbying on this.
And I brought that up with Dennis. I was like, haven't you just spent the money already? And it's especially when we're talking about fixed.
Yeah.
And actually, I thought it was telling that Dennis pivoted to fixed wireless access.
He did.
It's almost like he was conceding my point about fixed.
I think he was.
Yeah.
And I think that's the problem. I think this idea, and they haven't explicitly said this, but a lot of the lobbying has made out that there's a direct correlation between traffic growth and cost. Like, when the traffic growth goes up, our costs go up as well. Almost like the two are in lockstep.
And it's just not the reality on the ground.
I spent quite a lot of time, like months ago, looking at operating costs where operators actually reported petabytes on their collection of networks around the world. And Telefonica is one that does this. In their annual reports you can see. And the traffic's just gone up like really steeply over the last few years, as you'd expect.
Yeah.
That's what everybody's saying. But their operating costs have come down. Now I know it's hard because they're probably doing other things to cut those costs. They're taking things like the workplace
and their efficiencies. And
there's efficiencies. There's also, but there isn't a correlation there, And then you go to them and say this, by the way, because I went to their press office and I went, well, if you're making this point, shouldn't there be more of a kind of direct relationship? And they went, oh yeah, it's more on the capital expenditure side. By the way, the operating cost figures that I took included depreciation and amortization. But if you do want to just do it that way and look at capital expenditure, Telefónica's capital expenditure has gone down. Capital intensity, which is capex over sales, has gone down in the last few years. It's gone down from, I think it was up at about 17% a few years ago, and it's gone down to 14%. Bank of America says the reason for that is because they've finished their fibre rollout, more or less. They're really advanced in fibre rollout in Spain, which is the biggest market where they're doing it. And that's a really costly project. This is, by the way, the reason that BT is its capital intensity is like off the scale. It's at something like 25% last year because of the fibre project.
Yes.
And that's
a one-off.
That's a civil engineering job. That's nothing to do with traffic. That's dig up your streets, put lines in. 100 years, you've got it there.
I'm gonna, if it's all right with you, I'm aware of the time, and we're actually meeting someone after we stop here, and we're already 3:45. So what I'm gonna
bloody hell, really?
I know. Well, we did fuck around quite a lot at the start before we even started recording.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'm going to move it along. That's one thing I had to do a lot yesterday. This is a fun challenge. I set up, and regular listeners can have a guess who some of these people might be, but I set up a panel at the end, deliberately wanted to have some of the most opinionated people I know who've all been on this pod. I wanted them all together, and I set myself the challenge of trying to manage that whole thing, which I think I did all right by putting down really strict structure to it, so they weren't all talking over each other. It just reminded me. It just reminded me because what I had to do, I think about what like regular broadcast journalists have to be good at is interrupting.
Yeah,
and there's definitely an art to it.
Yeah, there is.
Like interrupting right, but not being too much of a dick, hopefully. Anyway, having said that, I'm going to interrupt you, Ian, because I'm going to move it on because we're running out of time. And I want to talk about...
interrupt, not like John Strand.
Yeah.
Yeah. You get him on this podcast and you'd never get him to be quiet. So.
Well, no, actually, I thought when he was on the pod...
It was actually fairly...
It wasn't too bad.
Yeah.
The other thing that we spoke about, which I think I'll get you to lean into another story that you were thinking about when we bring it up, is Open RAN. That came up a fair bit.
Yeah.
And again, it was another of these things where, you asked me the question whether anything that came up has changed my view on fair contribution. And the point I've conceded is it's broken. Something needs to give. I'm just not convinced by the remedies, some of the remedies that are suggested. So I'm going to ask you, Open RAN, we've chatted about it loads of times. We've again adopted a fairly sceptical tone on its necessity and utility and desirability. Did anything happen yesterday that made you change your mind about it at all?
Not really, no, to be honest with you. I have to be perfectly honest. We did have quite a lot of talk about Open RAN, and my position on it is I'm yet to be convinced by it. I'm not opposed to Open RAN. People think I'm anti-Open RAN. In fact, someone put a LinkedIn post up this week saying that Ian Morris is anti-Open RAN. They're actually quite positive about the coverage that I've written.
But they characterise you that way.
He's obviously no fan of Open RAN, so I had to respond and say, I don't have anything against Open RAN. I just think that journalists should ask tough questions and be sceptical and report on what's going wrong, basically. You know
what I mean?
So
not just and not just regurgitate the propaganda. If you listen to people who are incredibly pro Open RAN and all you do is take that at face value, you're not being a journalist.
Yeah. So I don't have anything against it. And I actually, one thing I did, I wouldn't say change my mind on yesterday, but one thing that made me, realise, I think, why they're trying to do it, and I appreciate this reason, is this supply diversity issue. So going onto the really big picture stuff about Open RAN rather than chips and all that rubbish. We have a market where on the RAN side, and it's Open RAN. The supply market for RAN is literally like 3 big companies, and then some smaller ones have the other kind of 20% that they don't control. And that wasn't the situation if you go back sort of 15, 20 years. It was much more diverse, a lot more competition in the market, and all of a sudden you're left with three options. One of them gets banned because the US is saying you can't use Huawei anymore. One of them runs into problems with its 5G strategy,
which was Nokia.
And therefore you've got one option. All of a sudden you're basically in a monopoly.
A monopoly, yeah.
And therefore I completely get why there would be interest in trying to find alternatives to that. And I also get why it was felt that Open RAN was probably the best way of doing it, because to try and create a Nokia from scratch or an Ericsson from scratch would be like a mammoth undertaking. It's almost like trying to do what TSMC's done, I suspect, to
right.
to gather. I mean, think about how many people those companies still employ. And I know they've
and the amount of IP they've got and all that.
Ericsson and Nokia, roughly sort of 100,000 people each. Yeah. All that IP they've built up over years. All the expertise it's concentrated. I mean, I went to Oulu myself in Finland and saw
I would like
some
to
of
have
this. And shame you couldn't do that. Maybe you get the chance at some point in the future to do it. But you do go there and you kind of appreciate how hard it is to replicate this.
Yeah.
And therefore, this notion of having open interfaces, which to really emphasize why that's important, it's that it gives an opportunity for specialists to compete where they couldn't before, because you'd come along and your operator would have to buy everything from the same company because the interfaces aren't open. So it has to get everything from the same provider. You open those up and all of a sudden you can go, well, I'm going to go for this company that only does radios. And they can focus all their resources on that, and they've got a much better chance than, we have to do baseband as well. We have to think about orchestration software and all this other stuff. So I completely get it.
Yeah.
And maybe yesterday, one thing that I wouldn't say I changed my mind, but I see why people are trying to do it. I'm kind of appreciative of that.
Yes.
And I actually think it's quite a good goal in a way. I don't think it's a negative thing to have that, to have a more diverse market.
Yeah, I mean, I've got to admit, one of the ways, again, this is part of my bias and my inclinations. One of the things that turned me against it is as soon as the American government started cheerleading it. Again, with me being a kind of small state kind of person, I'm just like, as soon as governments start getting involved in stuff that shouldn't be their business, I'm just instinctively antagonistic. But then I have to recognise that bias in myself and go, all right, if we can just discount the Yank government poking their nose in for 1 second and just look at the merits of the thing by itself.
Take the politics out of it and let's look at some of the companies trying to do this and saying we've got an opportunity here to go in and be innovative and we'll get some startup capital and then telcos will come and buy from us. That I like the sound of that if it can be made to work. The problem is all the challenges that go alongside that because, nobody got fired from buying from IBM's the saying, isn't it?
Yeah, in the 70s and 80s.
And I think one thing that was emphasised yesterday is how hard and how, it's critical infrastructure. It doesn't go down 9 nines, whatever it is, 5 nines, availability. It's very hard to do this. And, it's like trying to be a TSMC without all that know-how and it's expensive as well. It requires a huge amount of R&D commitment. Economies of scale are needed to be able to, compete. We really need telcos, to be honest, pulling together and all thinking that Open RAN's a good idea to make it work in a way, I think. That was one takeaway for me.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that point did come up on a thing that I did yesterday, this idea that we can go it alone and it doesn't matter if other people aren't doing it because we think we've got an opportunity, which was a point that was made. I don't really go along with that to some extent because I think you need the whole industry backing this for it to work. For it to work at scale and to get the economies there, you need lots of operators who are prepared to go.
And it's a long project.
It's a really long.
It's a long project, and I think the best way where I'll be most sympathetic to Open RAN as a concept and as a movement or an initiative or whatever is it represents a sort of wholesale technological evolution of how we do radio access networks, and that's good. I just don't buy the short to mid-term hype. I don't think like for like there's any conspicuous improvement on just getting it all from Ericsson or whatever right now.
Yeah.
But if it's something where we're going to look back on it in decades to come and be pleased that it initiated in the early 2020s, then yeah, great. But let's just calm down on the fucking hype a little bit, that's all.
I think the other problem with it is it's not very sexy. I mean, it is to me in a way because I think it's interesting.
Someone said no one goes into a phone shop and asks for Open RAN.
Exactly.
I mean, it's a bit facetious, but it's a good point.
I think it's actually quite a good point because, an event where there was a lot of talk about revenue growth and what do we do and, network exposure is something we haven't talked about, which was a theme as well.
Yeah.
As a way of making money. And
so how the hell do you make money out of 5G in general?
That's much sexier. I mean, it might not be that sexy, but it's much sexier than saying, oh, I can get my baseband equipment from a different person that I get my radio units from.
I think the label sexy should be used very cautiously in the context of telecoms.
Yeah.
Not many things are sexy.
No, but this really isn't sexy.
It's all relative, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, this is, it's not an easy thing, I don't think, to sell to like one thing I noticed, and I had chats with a guy called Adrian O'Connor about Adrian. If you watch the podcast, then like hello to him, because he's the CEO of a company called Benetel, which is talking of Irish companies doing tech and telecom. They're like an Irish startup doing radio units.
Okay.
This is I can talk about him because on the record.
It wasn't yesterday.
No, this is actually an older story I did, but I met him in Fuse as well this year and said hello to him there, and he was on a panel I did at that, and he talked about this on the panel, which wasn't under Chatham House rules. That the telcos talk a good game on Open RAN, some of them do, about wanting to use it and get involved in it. A lot of these big telco groups have their own VC arms, They invest in startups and they go in and spend money on, and and I've noticed this as well, all the money they put in, none of it goes into Open RAN companies. They talk about how interested they are in Open RAN, but if you look at the portfolios they have, where the money's gone and the kind of startups they've backed, I don't think there's any of them qualify as Open RAN companies, as network, specialists. And Adrian's point is that's very, very confusing to me as somebody who sees an opportunity here as a startup. And you'd think if there's VC arms within the big telco groups and the big telco groups are saying this is really important, that they'd come along and, be prepared to put their money where their mouth is, as they say, and they're not. So I think it's quite a hard sell to the investment community. Is the kind of conclusion.
One thing I'm going to do to move it on a little bit. I seem to remember you flagging up a Open RAN related story.
Was there was
something you wrote or something you read?
No, it was something I wrote because there was a Verizon investor conference this week, with Wells Fargo.
Okay.
When they get like an analyst on stage to talk to the CEO or whatever, but they actually talked to a guy called Joseph Russo. Like spelled Russo. I don't know if that's how it's pronounced. Russo?
Russo. Yeah.
So it's like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, but not
spelled like that.
Yeah. But anyway, he was like
it's not Froggy Rousseau.
No, like more Italian, like René Russo, the actress.
There we go.
Oh, but he's classic 90s actress.
Oh yeah, Lethal Weapon 3 or something.
Her and Gina Davis.
Yeah, she looked good in that.
Oh, she was cool. Yeah. She was good fun.
Thomas Crown. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah. But he's like he's got a really like long and convoluted job title, but he's basically CTO and not been in the job that long, I don't think, because they had a bit of like restructuring, not restructuring, but they move people around, So he's the CTO, and he got asked about various things and decided to chip in. I don't even think he got directly asked about it, but he was talking about Massive MIMO. Mm-hmm. Massive MIMO is like advanced 5G, basically. I think it's probably the easiest way to describe it to a layperson. It's like very advanced antenna units, basically.
With a premium on the bandwidth on the
premium on the bandwidth. They've got loads of like transmitters and receivers capability in them, and you can do things like beamforming where you target specific users instead of
which is very clever
areas with and it's very efficient in that way, and it's where all the high bandwidth like super duper stuff is. And it was, I think previously it was thought of as a technology you'd only need in urban hotspots, but now it's gone quite mainstream. So like some of these, they call them Benelux countries, like the ones in Northern Europe.
Benelux is Belgium, Netherlands, and
yeah. So like some of those are like rolling out apparently, like almost across the whole network. And I've heard like talk of other operators using it really widely, like across most of the network now. And it's probably going to go that way because capacity is going up, and we'll need more and more capable radios. So it's a mainstream market. It's not a niche business at all. Basically, what that means is if you're in Open RAN, you need to be able to support Massive MIMO, really, because otherwise you're missing out on a big chunk of the market.
And where it's going.
And Russo went, and this has been an issue actually for a while for Open RAN on the standards front, and Russo went, it's still not good enough, is essentially what he said at Massive MIMO. And he basically said we're not going to be using it then for Massive MIMO.
So again, that's back to my point about timescales and hype. It probably is. I'll happily, on the record, concede this point. It's here to stay. I think the room was asked yesterday whether it's here to stay, and pretty much everyone agreed it was. There was some interesting one, actually. There was one other one where the room was asked some questions about 6G, and clearly no one gave a fuck about 6G at all, which was quite funny.
But that was very telling. Because I think that's really worrying for the industry.
Well, it's worrying for an industry if it's still relying on Gs and an upgrade cycle with Gs.
But this is the guys that the Ericssons and the Nokias and the Huaweis of this world that sell the stuff that we like. People don't understand that these phones don't just work.
Yeah.
Like they don't just sort of transmit to each other. They need like base stations and things to do that. And if those companies are in peril, and again, this gets back to the Open RAN point. I think. Yeah. If they're not making money, and they're in really bad shape at the moment, by the way, aren't they? Let's be honest. Nokia
and Ericsson, yeah,
not doing.
I know for a duopoly, they're kind of fucking up, aren't they?
They're just people aren't buying the stuff because they don't see the need to spend. I guess at the moment they don't see the demand. They don't see the need and they've got we're in a high inflation era, interest rates.
And there's I think right now zero chance that there's going to be any kind of significant upgrade cycle with the next G.
Yeah, and then you get the NGMN coming out saying things like, which is this next generation, it's basically an operator club, therefore quite important. They issued a white paper a few weeks ago saying we want 6G just to be, some software upgradable thing. And it's definitely not like a big swap out of kit like 5G was. Do some sensing stuff, make a bit of software here and there, but really the message was we don't really want 6G very quickly. We don't really see a big need for some massive new project in 2030.
It's all got to change. It's all got to change. It's got to be incremental.
Yeah.
So many things have got to change. I think that's the biggest takeaway. I'm going to wrap that up because I want to just touch one or two other things and then we've got to shoot.
We never talked about that Apple thing.
That's one of the things I'm going to come back to. Yeah. I've still got it up on my screen here.
Yeah.
Basically, like to summarise what a lot of the chat was yesterday is, and I thought a lot of it kind of spookily echoed a lot of the stuff we spoke about on the last pod. The industry's bollocksed. What are we going to do about it?
Yeah.
And then that's where the interesting chat is. Some people think we should do this, some people think we should do that, but no one seems to disagree that the telecoms industry is in a spot of bother. And no one disagrees, by the way, that it's viewed as critical infrastructure. But, but it's not like, I don't know, I suppose it's not like other utilities because it's a much more dynamic, much more commercial, much more competitive market. But basically, just to summarise, and then I'll move on, the whole business model's kind of fucked. The way to sustain the demand we have on the networks, it's not clear how we're going to do it. And so we're looking for solutions. Some solutions, and some people, yes, they argued in a very informed and articulate way, some solutions are things like fair contribution. We've stated what our objections are to that. There must be other solutions, but what I think we all agree on is something's got to give.
Yeah.
So there we are.
Yeah.
I don't think, I'm going to make this a relatively short pod for us, and there hasn't been that much news, and we covered a lot of the interesting stuff that's happened to us yesterday and all that sort of thing. So let's just pivot back to that Apple 5G modem tangent, just because it's interesting, and I'm going to frame it because I've been covering Qualcomm quite a lot ever since basically my journalistic pivot in a mobile direction happened about 15 years ago, around 2007, when I was working for a blog called Hexus, and they were mainly focused on PC components. They would write about NVIDIA graphics cards and motherboards. Yeah. No, I've been tracking all that, and all that sort of thing. And I was the one where I saw that there was a hell of a lot going on in mobile, and I was not the first. But sometimes you don't need to be the first. You just need to be the person that goes, fuck it, this is what I'm going to focus on. And there was obviously a lot going on with the iPhone and all that sort of thing. And it's quite clear, it was clear to me really early that the modern day smartphone that we now take for granted, this black rectangle, touchscreen rectangle, was revolutionary. I remember calling it a digital Swiss Army knife. I was like, fuck. Suddenly, look at all these things that have been rendered obsolescent by this black rectangle. Cameras, sat-nav devices,
iPods,
personal organisers, all kinds of stuff. And it's incredibly powerful and incredibly empowering thing in your pocket. And so I started focusing on that. But because Hexus was quite chip focused, I thought I'd come at it from a mobile chip angle. So I got to know ARM, I got to know Imagination Technologies, and I got to know Qualcomm. So I was I've been following Qualcomm for a long time, since the Snapdragon brand was pretty much first in existence. And the thing about Qualcomm, and they've been around for a lot longer, and there's all sorts of history with them in terms of they've always been involved in litigation because they kind of cornered certain bits of the market, especially to do with the modem, which is relevant to this thing, in case you think I'm completely meandering. And so I covered them for a long time. And, they've done all right with application processors, what most people think of as the chips.
CPUs in the PC.
The CPU in phones. I mean, phones have what's for people who don't know, what's called an SoC, a system on chip, which is basically like a PC's motherboard, but it's all just one little block of silicon with all kinds of cleverness going on, and then little zones within that system on chip.
Yeah, they put those in base stations now.
Yeah, which is incredibly clever, and this is the kind of thing that TSMC is brilliant at manufacturing. And so they're quite good at application processors under this Snapdragon brand, but people like Apple have successfully managed to innovate such that Apple arguably makes even better processors than Qualcomm now, the ones that are in Pierre's laptop and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So they're brilliant at application processors, Apple, in their own right. And what they really want to do, Tim Cook is just obsessed with trying to do as much in-house as possible. I mean, it's the Apple ethos, isn't it? It's the closed ecosystem versus the open ecosystem. And part of that is, he wants as few suppliers as possible. He'd like to do it all in-house.
They've done the same thing on the PC side with Intel chips. And they've got their M1 to M3 range now, isn't it?
That's right, yeah. And that's all really good Apple silicon. And so what they really want to do is do ARM-based, is do...
did you see that? Sorry.
Go on.
Apparently they only pay ARM... Is it 30 cents per chip?
Per device, I think it is.
Is it?
Yeah, so per iPhone.
I read it was per chip, yeah.
Well, we're probably talking about the same thing because each device has got a chip.
30 cents, yeah.
You know what, but that's not new in terms of... I'm not trying to piss on your chips, it's not new in terms of everyone knows that ARM's business model is a tiny little...
Are we saying it's a lot or it's too much?
What I'm saying, it is little, but it's not surprising that it's little. It's known that ARM's business model is to take a tiny piece of the action, but over a massive scale.
Discussions about that, aren't there? They're trying to get more money, aren't they?
Right.
There's talk of overhauling their business model, to charge more, to sort of be a bit more aggressive on that front. Because you've got to find growth somewhere, obviously. So it's probably there, And then, of course, the consequence of that is that maybe people start to look for alternatives. That's the danger of doing it.
Yeah. But there aren't really, in a weird way, ARM's kind of got a monopoly in terms of the designs of energy efficient processors. ARM's almost got a monopoly.
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking broadly, because I know some of them aren't in the other one's sector, but they have tried in the past. The three sort of instruction sets that get considered are. ARMS one, which is reduced instruction set computing.
Well, ARMS actually originally the acronym was Advanced Risk Machines. Yeah.
And then there's the x86 one that's complex
Intel
instruction.
and AMD.
And then there's this thing called RISC-V that's like an open source thing, which I've heard the Chinese are looking at really seriously.
I bet they
because of all their issues with intellectual property elsewhere. But sorry, I got off on
it's fine. That's totally fine.
Getting really late.
But, well, so. I'll finish rambling and tee this up and ask, both of you what you think about it. So, Apple got into heavy litigation with Qualcomm. So basically, everyone's on the modem side. So people can diversify. This is the purpose of all that rambling. People can diversify in nearly every other area except the modems, where Qualcomm still kicks ass. And Apple really wants to diversify away from Qualcomm because I hate them. In fact, a lot of people who do business with them, and this isn't me saying this, Qualcomm, because they got a fuck of a lot of lawyers as well. A lot of people hate them, I think, because they're so good at what they do and they're so good at maximising their returns on what they do.
Yeah, Goldman Sachs got a little bit burnt on the Apple Card, apparently.
Did it? In what sense?
It cost them too much money.
Oh, that was the banking.
Yeah,
the Apple
banking.
Card. Sorry, I understand what you're talking about now. Yeah, and Apple's bailed from it or something like that.
No, I think Goldman Sachs is trying to
Goldman
get out of
Sachs
it.
has bailed. Yeah, the whole thing's... I know. Well, God, I mean, the technology... As a technology journalist, it's littered with stories of sort of quixotic diversification initiatives that don't pay off. Anyway, getting back to this. So they tried to sue Qualcomm because they thought they were paying them too much for the modems, and they lost. And that was really bitter for them. And so then they redoubled their efforts. They go, we'll fucking show them. We'll invent our own modem, and then they can go and kiss my ass. And they haven't been able to do it. And they had to, earlier on this year, I think they had to renew their license with Qualcomm, which they must have done through gritted teeth. And then the latest thing, that what Pierre was sharing, which is, the one he shared with me is from Mac Rumors, but they're channelizing a source, according to the operator of news aggregator account YEUX, if that was French, wouldn't it? 1122 on the Nava blog. So this is a sort of obscure East Asian blog, I think.
Yep.
Or obscure to me. Maybe it's not in East Asia. And separately, another leaker known as at TechReeve. Anyway, so a couple of leakers who are not, fully authenticated. So this is still very much rumour. But they've gone that Apple's thrown in the towel. What is it? Supply chain sources related to Apple's 5G modem departments claim that the company's attempts to develop its own modem have failed so far, and that Apple is in the process of winding down its years-long investment in the project. So that's a hell of a fail. And the biggest thing, before I hand it over to you, Ian, biggest thing it says to me is, of all the silicon initiatives, modems seem to be the hardest.
It could say that, or it could, because what I always think these companies do when they've got unlimited budgets, and it's harder to find a company that's got a more unlimited budget than Apple.
Apple's got a bob or two.
Is that you go, oi, Qualcomm engineers, come and work for us and tell us how you did it. Yeah. But so I think that it's very well locked down by Qualcomm. And what you just said,
they've got a lot of
lawyers. They obviously monitor this very, very well. This sort of secret sauce. It's like the Coca-Cola recipe, isn't it? Locked up in a bunker somewhere, and nobody gets, nobody gets to see it.
Qualcomm's basically like engineers and lawyers.
I mean, I've heard lots of people in the past say to me that one thing they call out when they're talking about a bit of engineering brilliance that's happened in the industry we cover is what Qualcomm does on the modem side is just like fucking genius.
Yes.
Like nobody gets close.
Just
to
like
it,
it's hard for anyone to get close to TSMC on the manufacturing chip side. It's hard for anyone to catch up. And the thing is, it's a moving target, isn't it?
Yeah.
They're constantly innovating, so you can get really good at it. But by that stage, they've already moved on to the next phase.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to start to wrap it. I'm going to just reflect on one thing. Listeners to this podcast, how tragic are we that quite often our social lives reflect our podcast. So we're keeping John Strand waiting at the pub, who's just having a quick one with us before he goes to the airport and flies home. And then after that, I'm going to go off and meet Mary Clark, who's our most frequent podcast guest, who's in town. I'm going to have a bite to eat with her. So that's how sad we are. We don't have any social life outside of hanging out with each other and our podcast.
We love Telecom.
So I think I'll wrap it up there. I've got a feeling, because of things like train strikes and all that sort of thing, that the next pod we do might be a remote one. I apologise. I know that's not quite the same. And then after that, we're going to have one more in the year where we're going to have our friend Elena, who's going to do the Christmas quiz, which has become a sort of regular thing now. So that should be a good laugh. So our last one of the year, before we get into early January, will be the 15th of December. Recording, probably published quite soon after that. So yes, join us for those, and thank you for listening.